माच्युत शंकर प्रभुति हे वै सदा वंदिता श्यामा पातु सरस्वती भगवती
Now, I welcome our respected guest of today, Mr. Anil Kumar Singh, who is an assistant professor from Economics Department of Shyam Lal College, Evening. Sir had teaching experience of 12 years. Sir, I request you to please enlighten us with your valuable words.
Yeah, thank you, Manvi. Good evening, everybody. Uh, Respected Dr. D.N. Singh, sir, our esteemed colleague, Dr. Manish ji, other faculty members, if they are present here, and dear students, it's a pleasure joining this session of Graduate Scholars Talk Series, 4th edition, and I am grateful to the members of Department of History for this invitation. And as we all know, today's topic is economic construction and constraints of the Raj. And this is an extremely important topic for understanding the economic decline of India during the British rule. As the topic suggests, we'll learn here that whatever Britishers did on economic front, they did to favor Britain. The fortunes of Britain were favored at the expense of Indian economy, its growth and development. Okay. As we all know about the literatures of Dadabhai Nauroji, great historian R.C. Dutt, and there are many others who have extensively written on this particular topic. And we all know about the drain of wealth theory of Dadabhai Nauroji. So I will not take much time because today's talk belongs to Saurabh Kumar Singh. But in economics, we generally study this economic exploitation of India by the Britishers. Mainly it has three categories. In one category, we generally read about the three phases of economic exploitation: the mercantilistic capital phase, then industrial capital phase, and then finance capital phase. And then we study about the various discriminatory or exploitative policies which the Britishers followed, be it the permanent settlement in agriculture, or be it the discriminatory trade policies which led to the deindustrialization, and also the assured return which actually they offered on British capital invested in India, and the corruptions of the British officers which made them hugely rich. And all this actually created a lot of surplus to the Britishers, which actually they didn't invest in India, but they took away that money to the Britain. Saurav will enlighten us on these particular aspects in detail. So, having said this, I'm extending my best wishes to Saurabh Kumar Singh, and also I congratulate Dr. D.N. Singh sir, Manish ji, for this great initiative. And I also congratulate Manvi, Sumul, Najmeen, Mudit, Saurav, who are the coordinators for this talk. And I also wish to mention and congratulate Ankit, Mandira, Subham, Preeti, Chandni, who are office bearers of your History Society Sakshya, which is doing a great job. These initiatives will definitely enlighten students, and also they will help them to express themselves and understand various topics which will definitely help them in pursuing or in realizing their dreams and goals in future. So I will not take much time. I'm thanking once again to everybody, members of Department of Economics and this History Society for inviting me for my opening remark. Okay, thank you Manishji for this great initiative.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you Manvi. Now over to you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Now, without further ado, let's start the program and please post your questions in the chat box. They will be considered during the questionnaire session. Now, I call Mr. Saurabh to present his opinions on the topic economic construction and constraints of the Raj.
Thank you, Manvi. A very warm good evening to all the respected teachers and the students. I, Saurabh Singh of BA program second year, is present here today to talk on the topic economic construction and constraints of the Raj. But before diving right into the topic, let's have a glimpse of the objectives of this talk. So, in this talk, we'll be looking at the various British economic policies, how they were constructed for the maximum benefits to the Britishers, the impact of their policies on the agrarian life, on the handicraft industries, that is the process of deindustrialization, and at last, we'll be looking at the concept of drain of wealth. So let's start this presentation with the words of Angus Madison, a very famous economic historian. He says that at the beginning of 18th century, India's share of world economy was nearly 23%, as large as of all Europe put together. But by the time the Britishers departed India, it had just departed to 3%. The reason was very simple. India was governed for the benefit of Britain, and Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. Our situation was so worsened that the India, which once was known for its trade, for having a very self sufficient, sustained society, eventually became a 100% importer society. By 1947, by 1947, our situation was so bad that we had to import food grains from the PL 480 scheme of the USA. So, this was about the introduction. Now, let us look how the British policies were constructed to affect our agrarian life. So East India considered India as an state, and state means a large territory which can be used for any purpose. And they structured their economic policies in such a way to extract maximum revenue from the land and the produce. In their rule of more than 200 years, the British East India Company opted for different land tenure policies like diarchy, izaredari, zamindari, rayyatwari, and mahalwari systems. There's different land revenue policies were introduced for different areas along with different taxation systems based on the needs and the greeds of East India Company. The taxation by the company was at a minimum of 50% of the income, and as far as the land tax is considered, it was at over 90% of the rental in Bengal, and in northern India at over 80% of the rental between 1793 and 1822. Now let's have a look at a data which was given by R.P. Ratta, which will make us very clear about the enormous taxation policy of the company. So R.C. Ratta says that land revenue during the last year of Mughals, that is during 1764 to 65 of Bengal, was nearly 8 lakh 18,000 pounds, which increased to 14 lakh 70,000 pounds in 1765-66. That is when the Britishers took over the financial control of Bengal for the first time. And when permanent settlement was established in Bengal, that is in 1793, sorry, this mark reached to 30 lakhs 91,000 pounds. And in 1857-58, that is when the crown overtook the East India Company, the land revenue collected was more than 1 crore 53 lakh pound, which by 1936-37 had reached the mark of 2 crore 39 lakh pound. So this was a data only about Bengal, so we can assess the situation was very much similar in the other parts of India as well. So India was just treated like a cash cow, and the revenues that flowed into the London's treasury was described by the Earl of Gotham as the redemption of a nation, a kind of gift from heaven. and these revenue were just being drained to Britain, and there was no, or we can say, a very little contribution to the improvement of agriculture or irrigation. The thing is that the land and agriculture as a source of revenue was not something new to Indians. It has been in practice since ages. But the difference is that the rulers didn't used to demand such enormous amount of tax, and even if they did so, they made sure that the peasants were provided with proper facilities. For example, we can see Ranjit Singh. He is said to have asked for nearly 50% of the produce as revenue, but at the same time, he made sure that the water reached to every field of the farmer. Tipu and the Marathas are the another example. And even Ardhashastra makes mention of different kinds of taxes to be levied. It talks about one-sixth of the produce as bhag to the king. And now let us look at a very famous doha of Tulsidas, which he says that कि बरसत हरसत सब लखें करसत लखे न कोय तुलसी प्रजा सुभाग से भूप भानु से होए। तो यह दोहा तुलसीदास इस प्रसंग में कहते हैं कि जब भरत और श्री राम का वार्तालाप रहा होता है और भरत श्री राम से वनवास त्याग करके अयोध्या चलने की बात करते हैं, जिस पर श्री राम उन्हें मना कर देते हैं, तब भरत उनसे यह पूछते हैं कि अयोध्या में हमें कर व्यवस्था कैसी रखनी चाहिए। तो श्री राम कहते हैं कि हमें अपनी कर व्यवस्था सूर्य की भांति रखनी चाहिए, कि जिस प्रकार सूर्य तालाब से, समुद्र से, हमारी अजूरी तक से पानी सोखता है तो हमें पता नहीं चलता, और वही पानी जब बादल बनकर बरसता है तो सब जीव जंतु खुश हो जाते हैं, सब भाव विभोर हो जाते हैं, प्रकृति खुश हो जाती है। तो जब हम कर ले रहे हो तो हमें सूर्य की भांति होनी चाहिए, ताकि जब हम किसी से कर ले तो उसे किसी प्रकार का कष्ट ना हो, और जब हम उसे उसका फायदा दें तो वह अत्यधिक प्रसन्न हो जाए। बट द ब्रिटिशर्स वर एग्जैक्टली अपोजिट ऑफ दिस. When they extracted from us, it felt enormous, and they were providing very little, or we can say minimal benefit to us. R.C. Dutt also shared a very similar view and said that taxation raised by a king is like the moisture of earth sucked by sun to be returned to the earth as fertilizing rain. But the moisture raised from the Indian soil now descends as fertilizing rain largely on the lands but not of India. And a Bishop Haber, an Englishman in 1826, also confirming to the enormous taxation, said that no native prince demands the rent which we do. So, in short, we can say, the arrangement of revenue were so high that the peasants were overburdened. And with the rigid manner of revenue collection and lack of investment in agriculture, the peasant was impoverished. They didn't have enough monetary sources to meet their subsistence need, leave aside the zamindar's demand. For example, if a farmer was earning 100 rupees, 50 rupees he was giving as revenue, 30 to 35 rupees as land tax, and what he was left was merely 15 to 20 rupees. In that, he had to sustain himself and also prepare for the next year's crop. And by chance, if the farmer was unable to pay the rent and revenue on time, he was evicted from his own land, reduced to the mere status of a tenant. And moneylenders too exploited the situation, and the situation of rural indebtedness also increased. It is said that in 1911, total rural debt in India was estimated to have been around 300 rupees crore, which by 1937 reached to 1800 crores. The peasants' position was so bad that Sir Charles Eliot, a Governor General's Council member, said that I do not hesitate to say that half of the agriculture population never know from one year to other that what it is to have a full meal. So this was the situation of India. And when permanent settlement or the zamindari system was introduced, the official ownership of land was also taken away from the farmers and was given to zamindars. And a situation of sub-infeudation was created. And this increased the number of intermediaries who had claim to the revenues. At some places in Bengal, it is said that one piece of land had nearly 50 intermediaries, and this took the corruption to a new height. The peasant had no means to invest in agriculture, nor did he own the land anymore. The zamindars and the absentee landlords had no desire to invest in agriculture, and it led to the stagnation of our agriculture. Then, during the second half of 19th century, we find that there was commercialization of agriculture, or we can say the capitalist transformation of the agrarian life was there. In India, the agriculture, which used to be a way of life, was now a business opportunity. Cash crops began to be grown for sale in markets and for exports, mainly to Britain. The Indian peasants didn't benefit from this commercialization, and it was mostly the merchants and the traders that benefited. It was highest in plantation sector, that is in tea, coffee, rubber, which was mostly owned by Europeans. For Indian peasants, the commercialization seemed like a forced process which resulted in the scarcity of food crops and eventually famines and increased poverty. Between 1910 to 1915, the area under food crops only increased by 12.4%, while the area under non-food crops increased by 54%. And in between 1935 to 1940, there was increase of 1.6 million acres of non-food land, while the land under the food crops fell by 1.5 million acres. Exports of tea increased from 190 million pounds in 1901 to 359 million pounds in 1940. Oil seeds from 5,49,000 tons in 1901 to 11,72,802 tons in 1939. So, due to the lack of food crops, the regular occurrence of famine became a common feature of daily existence in India. And these famines were not just food grain scarcity phenomena, but were the direct result of the poverty. About 2.8 crore people died in 1850 to 1900 because of famines. The average life expectancy was reduced to merely 32 years, while it was high as 64 years in USA or Europe. And Bipin Chandra said that this poverty was not a result of India's pre-British history or geography or culture. It was a product of colonialism. So this was about the agrarian life. Now we'll see how the Britishers affected our textile industries, our handicrafts. That is, let us look at the process of deindustrialization. So Indian textile industries in the 17th and 18th century used to have a control of nearly one third of the world trade. Almost everything that used to be made of silk, wool, wood, relating to either dress of women, furniture, was supplied by Indian trade. East India Company simply used to purchase it in India and sell it in the English markets. The value of Bengali textile alone exported from India is estimated to have been around 16 million rupees annually in 1750s. During the century to 1757, when the Britishers were just traders and not rulers, their demand is said to have raised the Bengalis' textile and silk production by nearly 33%. In short, our position in the world trade and especially to Europe was so strong that the English government had to pass an act in 1700 and 1720 banning all kind of clothes, silks, muslins, etc. from India. And this is how the deindustrialization, that is the destruction of traditional handicrafts, began in India. Deindustrialization simply is defined as a process of continued and marked industrial decline. Now, what the East India Company did was they eventually closed the international market for the Indian textile by imposing heavy import duty on the Indian products. And when the import duty was increased, the overall price of the Indian goods increased, and it eventually brought down the demand for Indian goods from the international markets. Paul Baroch in 1982, studying a series of world manufacturing output for India, says that the world manufacturing output of India decreased from 24.8% in 1750 to 17.6% in 1830, further to 2.8% in 1880, and at last it reached 1.4% by 1913. At the same time, industrial revolution was at peak in England, and there was local markets were flooded with the local goods in large quantities and were eventually very much cheaper. So eventually, there was no place for the high-priced Indian goods. They also opted for the unilateral trade policy, where there was 0% trade duty on products which came from England to India, and if anything was sent from India to England, the trade duty was around 80 to 100%. Charles Wilson in 1970 said that had not these been the case, had not such prohibitory duties existed, the mills in Paisley and Manchester would have been stopped in their outset and could scarcely have been again set in motion even by the power steam. They were created by the sacrifice of Indian manufacture. So once the international market for the Indian goods was closed, the Britishers focused on decreasing the Britishers focused on decreasing the demand of Indian goods in India itself. Britishers started importing machine-made textiles from England by devaluating their currency with trade tariffs favoring them, and British exports benefited, and simultaneously the Indian class was anglicized. You know, like today we are very much attracted to brands. The Indian middle class then felt proud while smoking the cigars made in England, drinking alcohols made in England, wearing textiles made in England, and this eventually closed the Indian market for the Indian industries. Now Ramchandra Guha, studying deindustrialization, he shows the deindustrialization in cotton textile using the consumption of raw material as a yardstick for the measurement of production. He says that the net availability of cotton yards fell from 419 million pounds in 1850 to 240 million pounds in 1870, and further to 184 million pounds in 1900. So, where the rest of the raw cotton was going? So, Irfan Habib, supporting his theory, shows that the export of raw cotton increased from 145 million pounds in 1855 to 443 million pounds in 1900, and the Indian markets began to be surrounding with cheap clothes made out of the electric loom of England, and the British exports, which in 1830 used to be around 60 million yards of cotton goods, it increased to 968 million yards in 1858, and by 1870 this mark crossed the billion yard mark. Paul Harnett argues that, in contrast to the entire share of domestic market by the Indian industries in 1801, industries now only could retain a 23% share in 1900 and 1901, leaving 66% for the imported goods and 11% for the mill-made products. This totally doomed the Indian handicrafts. And in short, the Britain inundated the very mother country of cotton with cottons. The situation was so bad that the then Governor General William Bentinck during 1834-35 said that the misery hardly finds a parallel in history of commerce. The bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. And in 1850s, when there was development in infrastructure like railways, telegraphs, roads, etc., this helped this helped more in the process of ongoing deindustrialization. Paul Baroch, American writer D.H. Buchanan has put it that the armor of self-sufficient villages was pierced by rail, and its lifeblood ebbed away. There was more penetration of the British goods into the Indian markets. There was no government support for the Indian industries, and also the laborers working in industries became landless labor. There was, same government at both sides, so there was no difficulty to suppress the laborers or, in closing the industries. And the major aftermath of the deindustrialization was ruralization. There was increase in number of rural areas in the country. In 1861, where 60% of our population was residing in villages, this mark reached to 73% by 1922 and to 80% by 1947. Now, why this ruralization took place was, the industries were mainly situated in the urban areas, and when they started to close, it eventually became very hard for the people to sustain themselves in the urban areas. And they started flocking back to the rural areas. This situation we have experienced very closely recently during the pandemic, when the industries started to close, the farmers and the workers started moving back to their hometown to indulge themselves in the agriculture. And this increased the ongoing pressure on the land and the agriculture. In 1891, where 62% of our population was dependent on agriculture, this mark reached 73% by 1911, and by 1922, nearly 75% of our population was involved in agriculture. This was all a conspiracy, a very well-designed conspiracy. Land revenues were already high, and with more people now moving into agriculture, it gave the Britishers an opportunity to convert India into an agricultural farm and commercialize the agriculture, which will eventually lead to more drain of wealth, and it will eventually favor the British industries. This deindustrialization also led to the loss of traditional arts and the craftsmanship. At last, concluding this portion, I would like to quote A.K. Bakchi, who in his book The Political Economy of Underdevelopment said that India was converted into a market for British goods and a source of supply of primary goods and labors. Skills were destroyed, art was begged, peasants were oppressed, and they were merely left on weather for agriculture. Due to all these things, the concept of the so-called third world countries arise, and which were generally very poor. Now we have very little time left, so we'll have a very quick glance at the concept of drain of wealth. So the drain of wealth concept was put forward by Dadabhai Naoroji, and this drain of wealth simply referred to the portion of national product of India which was not available for consumption to its own people, but was being drained away to Britain for political reasons, and India was not getting adequate economic or material reasons for it. Now, this drain of wealth generally had two components. One was the visible aspect, and another one was the invisible aspect. So, visible aspects that how our wealth was drained was profit from the trades, the land revenue, the plundering, the corruption. This was visible that how the our wealth was drained. Now, there was this invisible aspects like home charges, the interest on foreign capital investment, and the third one was foreign banking and insurance and shipping companies, and the monopoly of East India Company or the Britishers over it. So let us look at what these home charges were. So these home charges were annually remitted to the English government, and which used to be around 10 to 13% of our total revenue, which was generated from India before 1857. And this mark reached to 25 to 40% after the 1857. Now, the first component of the home charges was the dividend that was paid to the East India Company stocks, and it was nearly 6,30,000 pounds annually. The second one was interest on public debts raised abroad, and the East India Company is generally said to have 21 crore pound debt by 1900. The third component of the home charges was the civil and the military charges. Uh, for example, salary of Secretary of State. Now, William Digby gives a very interesting information. He says that the salary of Secretary of State in 1901 was equivalent to income of some 90,000 Indians, and the salary of Viceroy used to be around 2.5 lakh rupees. And there was the salary of the soldiers that were posted both in India and outside of India for the sole benefit of Britishers. And Ramsay MacDonald, another historian, in 1920 said that some 7,500 Englishmen were receiving some 20 million pounds annually from India as pensions. And the last component of the home charges was store purchases. This was generally the stationery purchases for the Secretary of State's office and the Viceroy's office. And this was usually made from the English market, not from the Indian markets. And the second important invisible aspect of the drain of wealth was the entry of British finance capital in the India. Sorry. Earn from India, then invest it back again in India in the form of capital in infrastructure and modern industries, and then earn even more. Indian market was already open, and English companies now started investing in India, and the profits were simply being drained to the England and to the English crown in the form of tax. By 1896, there was nearly 294 lakh pound of British capital in India, and this mark by 1939 reached to 830 lakh pound. It is said that by this time, 97% of the capital which was present in India was of the Britishers. And they invested the capital in those sectors that were complementary to the British industries. For example, railways. They started to invest in railways, and when the tracks were laid, and it eventually created the demand for coaches and the engines in the British industries. Britishers also had the monopoly over banking, insurance, and shipping companies, and they didn't allow any indigenous contribution. Like Tisco was developing at that time, but they created a lot of problem for the Tisco. At last, let us have a look at some of the estimates of the drain of wealth. So Dadabhai Naoroji in 1893 said that some 25 crore rupees was drained annually from India. William Digby said that some 50 to 100 crore rupees was drained between 1757 to 1815. G.V. Joshi in 1899 said that some 25 crore rupees was drained annually. And Mr. Montgomery Martin said that some 30 lakh pound rupees was drained annually. Now, a very recent data that Usha Patnaik said that some $45 trillion was drained from India, which is, at current time, the 2 times the GDP of USA and 17 times the GDP of the Britain. So it was So this was all for the today's talk, but before ending, I would like to say that the British conquest of India was the invasion and destruction of a high civilization by a trading company, utterly without scruple or pain or principle, careless of art and greedy of gain, overrunning with fire and sword, a company a country temporarily disordered and helpless, bribing and murdering, annexing and stealing, and beginning the career of illegal and legal plunder which continued for more than 200 years. It is very truly said that the sun never sets on the British Empire because even God cannot trust the Britishers in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saurabh. It was certainly wonderful and such a significant topic, and you audibly accentuated all the aspects and figures. As Mr. Saurabh pointed out, one of the data by Utsa Patnaik, which was brought out by Columbia University Press, that British Raj siphoned almost about 44.6 trillion US dollars from India over a period of 173 years. United Kingdom today's GDP, which it stands at 1.93 trillion US dollars. That drain that Britishers made was 26 to 36% of the central government's budget. It would obviously have been made an enormous difference if India have with far better health care system and social welfare indicators. There was virtually
Mudit, can you close your video so we can hear your voice clearly? Because we are not hearing you.
okay.
Kindly
There was
again
virtually
say
no
the,
increase in per capita income.
Mudit, kindly say all the remarks again, because it's very interesting.
Uh, as Mr. Saurabh also pointed out, that one of the most detailed figure brought out by the well-known economist Utsa Patnaik, published by Columbia University Press, calculated that British Raj siphoned out at least 44.6 trillion US dollars from 1765 to 1938. That means over a period of 173 years. If we put that data in context, Britain's 2020 nominal GDP is 1.938 trillion dollar, which means 23 times more than nominal GDP of UK today. That drain varied between 26 to 36% of the central government budget. It would have been obviously made an enormous difference if India's huge international earnings had been retained within our country only. India would have been far more developed with better health and social welfare indicators. There was virtually no increase in per capita income between 1900 to 1946, even though India registered its second largest export surplus earning in the world for 3 decades before 1929. Since all the earnings were taken by Britain, such stagnation is not surprising at all. Ordinary people died like flies owing to undernutrition and disease. It is shocking that India's expectation of life at birth was just 22 years in 1911. I repeat again, it was just 22 years at 1911. The most telling index, however, is food grain availability. Because the purchasing power of ordinary Indians was being squeezed by high taxes, the per capita annual consumption of food grains went down from 200 kg in 1900 to 157 kg on the eve of World War II, and further plummeted to 137 kg by 1946. No country in the world today, not even the least developed, is anywhere near the position India was in 1946. And I think I don't need to say anything beyond this. Now we have some of the questions from our avid listeners. Let's take up on them. First question is from Aman Kumar. He is asking why Zamindars were given ownership right and the land was made a private property. Mr. Saurabh.
Yes, first, zamindars, the Britishers always needed a political ally. The earlier they were zamindars, before that they were bankers. So they already always wanted to have a political ally. And second thing with the zamindars was they already had an influential amount of control. So it would easily make them easy to collect more revenue from the land. It would give a kind of financial stability to the British Empire, as they would not have to care take a lot of tension about that how the revenues will be collected, as it was totally laid upon the zamindars. And the second part was that why the land was made the private property. So when these different land policies were introduced, and they were introduced by the different governor generals, and it totally dependent on their ideologies. And zamindari system was introduced by Lord Cornwallis, and he is said to have very great influence of the French naturalist. And they believe that a lot of benefit can be generated from the agrarian system if the land was converted to a private property. So it was, according to me, it was simply converted to the private property because of the ideological thinking of Lord Cornwallis.
Thank you, Mr. Saurabh. Next question we have from Vishesh Kazmi. He is asking, some historians argue railway connected India's markets. British purchased all crops and goods from Indians and gave employment. So policies benefits Indian too. What's your take on this?
As I already mentioned during my presentation, that railways was kind of a tool by Britishers to to degrade India further, because they were investing in railways, and it was creating a demand for the coaches and the engines in England. They were creating it with the money of people of India. And also, this railways helped to connect the port cities to the inner part of the country, and it eventually helped to more transport of raw materials from the Indians. And it also helped in the process of deindustrialization, as it also helped to transfer of the goods to the furthest, to the each every part of the country. It is said that they have laid nearly 45,000 square kilometer of railways in India. So it was nothing to help us. It was simply for their convenience.
Uh, Thank you again, Mr. Saurabh. Now, I would like to call Ms. Sakshi, who is the ex-president of Sakshya, to share her experiences with Sakshya. Ms. Sakshi, if you are here.
I think Sakshi has left this meeting just now. So go ahead with your proceedings. Yeah.
Okay. So now I would like to call Mr. Shivanshu Saini to give us a glimpse of theme of his talk for next week.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Mudit.
Shivanshu.
Thank you, Mr. Mudit. Firstly, good evening, everyone. This is Shivanshu, and I am the student of BA program History plus Pol Science from first year. On the next Sunday, firstly, I am thankful to all the Sakshya department. It is a great privilege for me that I will present my topic to you on the next Sunday. And my topic is Human Evolution, Theory, Progress, and Debates. In this, I will briefly explain about the historical backgrounds of the human evolution, what are the daily dating challenges for that, and what are the genetic revolution, and what are the current debates and the issues for that human evolution. Thank you.
Sakshi is here. So kindly Mudit call Sakshi.
Okay. Now I would like to call Ms. Sakshi, ex-president of Sakshya, to share her experiences that she had with Sakshya with all of us.
Sakshi, where are you?
Am I audible?
Yes, Sakshi, you are audible. You are having
evening, sir.
60 seconds time to give them blessings.
यार
First
यार
of
पहली
all,
बार आ रही है ना ये
सर
साक्षी
बोले
बोले
दीजिए सर अभी।
हाँ ठीक है कोई बात नहीं
हाँ साक्षी go ahead.
ट्रेवल कहीं पर मुझे लिंक मिला और जैसे ही मुझे लिंक दिखा इवेंट का, मुझे बड़ी खुशी हुई कि इवेंट चल रहा है साक्ष का। और सर अदर सोसाइटीज भी हैं, उधर कोर्सेज भी है, उधर तो नहीं हो रहा है इवेंट, इधर इवेंट हो रहा है, मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लग रहा है। और मैं बहुत खुश हूँ कि मेरे जूनियर्स इतने अच्छे हैं कि सोसाइटी को इतने आगे तक लेके जा रहे हैं। एंड सर जो भी आई थिंक सौरभ उनका नाम था, अच्छा उन्होंने बोला, बड़े अच्छे से पेश किया चीज़ों को और कोटेशंस बड़े अच्छे डाले, बड़ा अच्छा लगा। आंसर मतलब होता है ना 15/15 का आंसर उन्होंने लिख दिया, वो अमेजिंग।
Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you. All the best. You too. Mudit, go ahead.
Now I would like to call Mr. Ankit to give vote of thanks. Mr. Ankit.
Thank you, Mudit. Good evening, respected teachers and my dear friend, myself Ankit, President of Sakshya History Society. जैसा कि आप सभी जानते हैं कि हमारे कॉलेज में बहुत सारी सोसाइटीज़ हैं, उनमें से एक हिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट की सोसाइटी साक्ष्य हिस्ट्री सोसाइटी, जिनके कन्वेनर डॉक्टर DN सिंह, गाइडेंस ऑफ डॉक्टर प्रमोद कुमार, डॉक्टर मनीष कब्रवाल, डॉक्टर सीमा मीना एंड मिस्टर अजय कुमार। इन सभी शिक्षकों के निर्देशानुसार साक्ष्य ने एक अलग पहचान बनाई है और ऊंचाइयों को भी हासिल किया है। यह सोसाइटी 2016-17 में स्टैब्लिश की गई थी, जिसके पहली प्रेसिडेंट मिस स्वातिधर 1617, सेकंड मिस्टर आशीष कुमार 1718, थर्ड मिस साक्षी 1819, फोर्थ मिस पिंकी कशाना 1919 and 20. Now this year office holders President Mr. Ankit, Vice President Miss Mandira Paul, Secretary Mr. Subham Tiwari, Joint Secretary Miss Preeti Rai, Treasurer Miss Chandni Sikarwar, Executive Members Miss Charu, Miss Sakshi, Mr. Ajay, Mr. Vishesh, Miss Priya and Miss Divya. Now GSTSC committee members, first of all, talk series convener Dr. Manish Kamrawal, GSTSC student coordinators Ms. Manvi, Ms. Sumul, Mr. Saurabh and Mr. Mudit. यह सोसाइटी बहुत सारी एक्टिविटीज करवाती है, कंपटीशन करवाती है, जैसे डिबेट, क्विज, कैरियर काउंसलिंग, लेक्चर सीरीज, ओरिएंटेशन प्रोग्राम। इसके साथ साथ एजुकेशन टूर भी करवाती है। लास्ट सोसाइटी ने ऑनलाइन फ्रेशर वेलकम, इसके साथ साथ OBE सेमिनार और 3 GSTSC प्रोग्राम करा चुकी है। अब मैं पूरी सोसाइटी की तरफ से हमारे विशिष्ट अतिथि डॉक्टर अनिल कुमार सर का शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूं, जिन्होंने अपना अहम समय हमें दिया। इसके साथ साथ उन सभी शिक्षकों के लिए भी एक बड़ा धन्यवाद जो आज हमारे साथ जुड़े। मैं उनके प्रति अपनी ईमानदारी की भावना का उल्लेख करता हूं। इसके अलावा मैं मिस्टर सौरभ कुमार सिंह का धन्यवाद करना चाहता हूं, जिन्होंने आज अपने टॉपिक को बहुत अच्छे तरीके से प्रस्तुत किया। इसके साथ साथ उन सभी प्रश्नों का उत्तर भी बहुत अच्छे तरीके से दिया जो छात्र और छात्राओं द्वारा। मैं न केवल हमारे विभाग से बल्कि पूरे कॉलेज तथा अन्य कॉलेज से जुड़े उन सभी छात्रों का धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूं जो आज इस प्रोग्राम में आए थे। इन सभी के साथ साथ मैं अपनी टीम का धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूं, जिन्होंने इस कार्यक्रम को सफल बनाने में अपना योगदान दिया।
Yes, Mudit.
Thank you, Mr. Ankit. Thank you all the respected teachers and all my colleagues who have joined today and made this evening a successful one. And we are hoping that you will join next week with us as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
हेलो
हाँ अंकित।
हाँ सर, हाँ ये सर थोड़ा नेटवर्क इशू हो गया था सर। और
हो गया अंकित, हो गया। दिस इज ओवर। अगर अनिल सर कुछ बोलना चाहते हैं तो मोस्ट वेलकम।
हेलो।
हाँ अनिल जी, अगर कुछ लास्ट रिमार्क देना चाहते हैं बच्चों को तो आप दे सकते हैं।
It's a very brilliant idea, and I congratulate everyone. I will also I didn't know about this particular talk series. I will definitely try to spread about this in my class and other classes.
Yes, sir.
So that more students could join it and could benefit from it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, sir.
मैं भी thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, अनिल जी.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Welcome.
अब बंद किया जाए?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much for joining with us.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.